All right, I think we'll start. So if I could have your attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. I'm Osama Vimershid, the director of the center, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker, the Honorable Dr. Nazar Albaharna, Britain's former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, a former member of the Kingdom's Ministerial Cabinet, and currently a visiting researcher here at CCS, and we are delighted to have him among us. Dr. Albaharna obtained his PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Wales in 1979 and spent 24 years as a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Bahrain, where he held the title of Dean of Engineering and Vice President for Academic Programs and Research. He has published more than 30 papers on mechanical engineering, energy, technology, training, and education. As Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Albaharna helped shape his country's foreign policy, but he's also had a tremendous impact on Bahrain's domestic affairs. He was chairman of the Labor Fund, a multi-hundred-million-dollar independent authority through which he formulated innovative policies and programs, established small and medium enterprises, created thousands of jobs, and enhanced individual skills. In April 2008, Dr. Albaharna headed Bahrain's first country report and action plan, which was presented to the United Nations Human Rights Council. In business, he spent 10 years as a consultant and was elected Deputy Vice Chairman of the Board of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And Dr. Albaharna's talk today is entitled Bahrain's Political Stalemate, Is There a Way Forward? And in it, he will present his assessment of the prospects for a viable resolution to the current political crisis in Bahrain. So please join me in welcoming our guest, Dr. Nazar Albaharna.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you, Sama, for the nice introduction, and thank you all for joining me to listen to me to a small talk about my country, Bahrain. And of course, I'll be focusing on the political stalemate. What I'm presenting is a collective of my experience, as well as meeting with some of the people in Bahrain and outside Bahrain. I'll be very glad to answer any question which you may have. Okay. Well, Bahrain's significance politically is not due to its size or its economical power. Bahrain has the small island in the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf. It's about 750 kilometers. It is the home of the US Fifth Fleet and part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and connected by a causeway to Saudi Arabia and close proximity to Iran and Iraq. Now, historically, Bahrain was actually all this area, stretching from Basra to Oman. All of this area was called Bahrain, historically. And the island, Bahrain Island now, was called Awal. Then, of course, the whole thing changed as countries emerged and Bahrain became the existing Bahrain. Now, Bahrain, a majority of Bahrainis are Muslims. We have very few families from different religions. We have Jews, small number. We have also Christians, and we have Hindus and Buddhists and others in a small, very small numbers. But the majorities are Muslims, and Muslims are divided between Shias and Sunni, or Shia and Sunni. The Shia are divided into two, usually comprised of two groups. One they call the Albaharna, which is the Arab Shia, and the other called Ajam. Ajam is the Shia who came from Iran, immigrated from Iran, and stayed in Bahrain. In the Sunnah, there is the Arab, we call them the Arab, who are actually Sunnis, came from the Arabian Peninsula, and that's the word Arab was referred to them. And they came long time ago and settled in Bahrain. And then we have the Hawala, which is basically an Arab people who immigrated, who've gone back and forth to the coast of Iran, and then went back and forth to the Arabian side. Then we have other, like also some Persians from Persian origins, and from other origins who are Sunnis. Bahrain has a political stalemate now for over a year. The government and the opposition are not reaching to a political solution that could satisfy both sides. How long the situation will last? Is there a way forward to this impasse? If so, how it can be reached? If this political instability is a local affair, or will it have an effect regionally? Is Bahrain part of the solution, or is it part of the problem in the region? I hope I can address all these issues as we go along. Before we start, there is a famous talk by Charles de Gaulle. He said that before you speak about politics, look at the map. So we have to look at the map, because Bahrain itself is in the center of the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, but also its close proximity to big countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and others. And the importance of Bahrain is the importance of the Gulf, because the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, is an open area available to be controlled. So it's an open area for conflict, and it's continuing to be that, not now, but long time ago, and it's continuing to be in that respect. And the Arabian Gulf also is a position in the heart of the world. And also, the Arabian Gulf is the resource of the energy of the world. We have 16 million barrels per day of oil going through the Strait of Hormuz, and we have nearly 2/3 of the non-reserves, oil reserves, are in that part. So that's the importance of the region. So we can see now the importance of Bahrain if we look at the map in general. Now, of course, the other things that started the Arab Spring, as it started in Tunisia and Egypt, and Bahrain, in Yemen, and in Libya, and in Syria. Now, this Arab Spring, of course, has affected all these countries. But how did this affect Bahrain? Before we to look at the crisis or the stalemate, we have to draw first a picture. To draw this picture, we have to look at 5 points. First, we have to analyze the crisis. We have to know the origin of this crisis and how it has developed to reach the present situation. 2, we have to analyze and define all the parties involved in this decision-making related to this crisis, whether locally, regionally, or internationally. 3rd, we have to know or to draw a picture of the long and short-term objectives and strategies of all these parties. 4, we have to know the power balance between these parties. And 5, we have to know the climate that's surrounding the crisis, locally, regionally, and internationally. An analysis of the crisis, some people will say that the crisis started only a year ago, or some people will refer to it into the 90s. I will go much, much further down. Since 1910, the Bahrain are used to submit petitions to the British asking for their protection. So, because Bahrain was under the British protection, and we have a British consular, so they submit petition asking for consent. In 1922, the Bahrain has submitted a petition to the governor, the ruler of Bahrain. The ruler of Bahrain at that time was Sheikh Isa bin Ali, and asking them to abolish serfdom, and also to make a judicial reform. He partially obliged to that. In November 1934, another petition for reform submitted to the British Council This was totally rejected by the British, unfortunately. In 1936, this was the first time. The previous petition was mainly from the Shia, the Bahrain. But in 1936, there was a switch in which the first time Shia and Sunnah agree on a national reform. And this was done by Sunnah and Shia merchants. And they were demanding the following: formation of a legislative council, a police reform, and reform of the judiciary system. So these things were going for a long time. In 1938, the first time, there were some leaflets, circulation of leaflets, using what we call propaganda. There were no Twitters, no Facebook, no YouTube, but they used leaflets at that time. In 1946, there was the first infiltration of the leftist ideology inside Bahrain. And in 1955, the formation of National Bahrain Liberation Front, which is adopting the Marxist ideology. And then in 1956, this was the first, the biggest uprising in Bahrain, in which the National Union Organization formed by a group of Shia and Sunni. And this, they have actually took the whole country together with them, and they were asking for formation of a legislative council, creating civil and criminal law, formation of labor unions, and then establishing high court. This was in 1956. What happened to them, of course, the leaders were captured and they were exiled. In 1957, the formation of the Arab Nationals Movement was formed, and in 1958, the formation of the Socialist Arab Ba'athis. Of course, if you look at, that's why I say you have to look at the map, because if you look at this implication, for example, in 1956, this concur with the aggression that Egypt has, which is by France, Britain, and Israel. And that, in fact, has affected Bahrain. And if you look at of course, the previous that is the revolution which happened in Egypt, the Egyptian revolution. And if you look at the 57, 58, is when the Ba'athis came, and the revolution in Iraq, they overthrown the Qasim and took over, etc. So it is actually has relation to what's going on in the world. In 1964, there was also a massive demonstrations asking for a lot of reforms, and this took about a year to settle down. In 1972, Bahrain got independence. In 1973, the first constitution enacted in December 1973. In 1975, the constitution abrogated, and the country was governed under the emergency law from 1975 to 2002. Going to the 1980, there was also some demonstrations. Between 1991 to 1999, the unrest of the early 90s, which took the country to a higher level of violence and instability for a while. In 1999, the new Amir came, Sheikh Hamad bin Isa, and he promised to make reforms, and then put a new charter, which was established in 2001, and which was put into referendum and obtained 98.4%. In 2002, a new constitution was established based on the charter, and in the same year, the opposition has boycotted the parliament election, stating that the constitution of 2002 is not as they were agreed upon on the national charter. And of course, the opposition again in 2006 came back and joined the parliament, and that was a split again. I'll talk about that, the split into the opposition. In 2011, of course, the inspiration of the Arab world. This is basically the crisis. I took it in a chronological order so that we can understand what is the crisis and how it started. The second point is to look at who are the parties involved in the crisis and who are the decision makers in this crisis. We have three groups. We have the opposition, which comprise of three parties. We have Wifaq plus 5. They call them the 6 societies, and which include Wa'ad and other Amal and other 3. Then we have Haq and Wafa, which have splitted from Al-Wifaq. When Al-Wifaq decided to join the parliament in 2006, they split and they formed Haq, and then by Hassan Mshema and Abdul Wahab Hussein formed Al-Wafa. And then we have the third one, which is 14th February, which is a youth gathering. Nobody knows how, what is the composition of this, exactly how they work and whom they support. Some of them, they support Haq and Wafa, and some of them support also Al-Wifaq. But they're not an organized sort of party. Then we have the pro-government. The pro-government, we have the Muslim Brotherhood, and then we have the Salafis and a mixture. The Muslim Brotherhood are actually, in Bahrain, are the majority of them, nearly most of them, are from the Hawala. The Arabs, they're forming the Salafis. So the Salafis are formed by the Arab Sunnis, who are actually came from the Arabic Peninsula. While the Muslim Brotherhoods, the majority of them are formed by the Hawala. Then we have a mixture. This mixture came as Sahwat al-Fatih, Tajamma al-Wahda al-Wataniya. These are factions that try to, first of all, to group together on one group, including all of them, but then they decided that they couldn't do it because it cannot work. Especially when you go to the parliament, etc., they will be split in the agendas and the work of all these three parties. So it's a mixture of businessmen as well as mixture of some religious leaders. The government, we have the two sides. We have the reformists and we have the hardliners. And then in the regional, we have the Saudi Arabia and the GCC. We have Iran and we have Iraq. In the international, we have the USA and UK. So far, these are the parties that directly or indirectly were involved in the crisis. Now then, we have to look at the long and short-term objectives and strengths of all involved parties. The strategies of the, in terms of the internal parties, the opposition, the majority are led by Al-Wifaq. So Al-Wifaq, they are the one they can call the shot. Yes, they don't have total control on the street, but in terms of the political decision, etc., they are the one who's leading in that. And they usually, the implementation, they are seeking the implementation of what they call the Manama document, covering the 7 points which were proposed by the Crown Prince. The pro-government parties, the Muslim Brotherhoods plus Salafis, they are eager to have a control over the government institutions plus applying some of the Sharia's laws. The others mainly is to gain position in the government and also in business. And some of them, they are also looking at their private interest, where their private interest lies. The government, we have the hardliners. They want to have the status quo with limited changes that still will keep the control over the state. The reformists, they want a progressive economical development with fair political changes that will allow stability in the country, but still to have major control on the state. The regional parties, Saudi Arabia to keep Bahrain under its full control. Iran, Bahrain is part of the bargain of the long struggle over the region. And Iraq supporting the Shia and Bahrain to have their fair rights. International, USA and UK, they work towards democratization of Bahrain without actually jeopardizing their control or their, through their allies or their relationship with their allies. So Bahrain is key for changes in the Gulf. However, it's keeping that balance between human rights balance, democracy, as well as not to antagonize their allies. And the short-term strategy, internally, the opposition is, and the government, they're using both Sun Tzu, that's why I put Sun Tzu picture there, Art of War. The opposition, they try to break the enemy's resistance without fighting. And basically, Al-Wafaq is to continue with a keep on the demonstration and use the external media and NGOs to pressurize the government. So keep on the pressure. And of course, Al-Wafaq still pushing for a peaceful demonstrations. However, they cannot control also what Haq or Wafa or the 14th February, whom they, in the last time, they resort to Molotovs to defend themselves against the clashes with the police. Pro-government, they have no known strategy. And it's just like ad hoc actions and reactions. So they just wait for actions that comes on and they react to it. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left. We haven't seen a real strategy that they are trying to focus on. Now we go to the government, the hardliners. The best way to win a war is by making your enemy defeat himself. And that's the strategy, basically, is to keep on the show of force and keep on the pressurizing Al-Wafaq and trying to making a fracture or sort of fraction that could come up through disintegration of Al-Wafaq and formation of other parties. And the reformists, no strategy. Again, just wait and see and avoid being away from the spotlight. Just being in the spotlight, but not really strategy to see how something on the short term that could change things. In the regional side, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain is very strategic and try to squash the opposition to reach to a solution that's acceptable to them as soon as possible. The delay is affecting their struggle with Iran because also we have the eastern province on the side. So whatever is happening in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain could really affect Saudi Arabia. Iran, Bahrain is a strategic in their challenge with Saudi Arabia. So keeping the thing going, boiling in Bahrain will help them in pressurizing Saudi Arabia and especially the eastern province. International, USA and UK basically support the government yet to push for a solution. Again, it is this balanced approach between change and also supporting the tenants. Now, the power balance between these parties, we have to see. In the opposition has so far the upper hand on the external media in terms of coverage and in terms of they're nearly winning in the international and also in the local media, in spite of they don't have the national TV and broadcast, etc., but they're using the Twitter and YouTube and others to pass the messages to the supporters and for others. And we can see, if you go on the Twitter, you can see there's a lot of YouTube projected through the Twitter and involves journalists from all over around the world. The government, they have the upper hand in military, police, and in economy. They also have the maneuverability leverage using contracted PR. So they have PRs that PR firms that they can help them with the external and also in terms of internal media. Of course, the government tried using just sheer force before, as what happened last year, in February last year, but finally they find that that was not the right tactics. The only tactics now is just to is to keep the pressure on the discrediting the opposition, and the opposition will fragment by one day, and the people will get fed up with all of that, and the whole thing will dissolve. In the same with the regional, Saudi Arabia, they control Bahrain in terms of economy and in foreign policy. And in a sense, controlling the economy because they have a shared oil field, and Bahrain gets 150,000 barrels per day out of that field in terms of budget, because Saudi Arabia sells the oil and gives Bahrain its 150,000 barrel cost, as well as they pump about 200,000 barrels per day to Bahrain for the refinery. So Bahrain is really controlled economically by Saudi Arabia. In terms of foreign policy, of course, it goes through the GCC, but again, Saudi Arabia has the upper hand in terms of shaping the foreign policy in the area. So they also, private TVs, they were used in the in Saudi Arabia to actually to hit on the opposition, but also to discredit people and to spread sectarianism and bigotry and other things. And so far, this pressure has had an effect on the people, especially from the Sunni side, to actually to have resentment to the situation in Bahrain. Iran, they're using also their media. So it's a media warfare, and because the opposition, they don't have their own media inside, they refer to Al-Alam or Future, or whatever the Iranians are providing. Of course, we have Iraq also are providing that. They have the same channels that they can, they're using, the opposition are using in terms of putting their views, etc. So internationally, their role is limited because of the involvement of Saudi Arabia. Because again, it is Saudi Arabia is too forceful in the area, and they don't want to upset Saudi Arabia, especially United States and United Kingdom. Now, in terms of the climate surrounding the crisis, locally, regionally, and internationally, at the present, the climate in Bahrain is affected by the political situation in Syria. And Syria has eclipsed the situation in Bahrain. However, the opposition in Bahrain had so far managed to get the current situation to continuously expose to the external media. It requires more efforts, etc. And journalists usually look for something. They look for death. They look for something that catch up the newspaper. And Bahrain cannot supply that. So it's basically, it's in Syria, that's the focus. However, I think the opposition has actually managed to get attention still so far of the international media and getting the international media with them. The government has some success in the international public relations by the employment of specialized public relations firms, and they are actually trying to also counter attacks, whether it's in hard talk. You see there's a recent hard talk with the, I think yesterday or today it will be with the Minister of Justice. And Nabil Rajab was in hard talk about 1 month ago. So they try also to match that. Despite other crises in the region, Bahrain, I would say, crisis is still very much alive, and something has to be done toward that. I go very quickly about the Manama document. Maybe you don't know about it. I'll just explain it very quickly. This is what Al-Wifaq +5 has offered in terms of getting out of this crisis. And they have put 5 points. The first point is elected government representing the will of the people, fair election system, 1 vote for each person, unicameral legislature, independent and reliable judiciary authority, security for all citizens through the participation of all society composition. They also added 3 additional points. One is dealing with the political nationalizations by forming a national committee to study all the nationalist process and to rectify what has happened during the last years. And second, dealing with discrimination issues. And 3, to concur on a national holistic media policy to support the unity of the people and to get rid of sectarianism. Now, the Crown Prince 7 points is elected parliament with full authority. This is what the Crown Prince has proposed before the GCC army came into Bahrain. And this was the last thing that was proposed by the Crown Prince, and they refer to them to the 7 points by the Crown Prince. And these are: 1, elected parliament with full authority; 2, government representing the will of the people; 3, just electoral districts; and 4, dealing with political nationalizations; 5, fighting financial and managerial corruption; 6, dealing with state property; 7, dealing with the sectarian issues. Now, how to go? What is the way forward? Of course, looking at all this picture now, we understand how the picture, who are the decision makers, etc. To go forward, of course, it's not impossible. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. And what I'm putting here, I'm going to put 10 points on how to go forward. And of course, they say that the devil is in the details. Yes, but I think for anything to move forward, we have to have an agenda and a roadmap to agree upon. Because without that, it will be just difficult to sit in a dialogue. Just to sit in a dialogue without having a common thing, it will be just probably will be used by the media in one way or another. So the points are: the first of all, we start with the Biki reports. So the government has to implement the Biki reports and recommendations as outlined by the Biki reports. And regardless of what's the pace, etc., but I think if there is genuine application of that, that will ease up the situation and in a way will allow things to move forward. The release of all prisoners sentenced by the military court according to the Biki report. This will give also a goodwill, as what happened in 2001 when the King of Bahrain actually, he came forward and he released all prisoners, and he asked all the people from outside the opposition to come to Bahrain and join in a total sort of reform. So I think the release of prisoners; 3, to restrain from violence and to enter into inclusive and constructive political dialogue. The political dialogue will go into the details of these points, which I'm going to mention, and people have to think of the stability of Bahrain. The pro-government, which includes the Muslim Brotherhood, Salafis, and the others, has to get involved by submitting their reforms requirements. There is no way you can avoid or sideline those groups. They have to be involved. Whether you agree with them, whether the opposition agree with them or not agree with them, they constitute quite a number of Bahrain, and they have to get involved into the solution. So they have to submit what they think, like what Al-Wafaq submitted the Manama document. They should submit also how they look at the reforms. What are the points they want to add? The government and the opposition have to look at the long term, starting with the Manama document, the Crown Prince 7 points, as well as the other document which could be supplied by the Muslim, the other factions, the pro-government factions. The opposition and the government has to agree on certain concessions, because you cannot get everything out of everything. The neighboring countries have to support the stability of Bahrain by supporting the suggested agreement and endorsing it, making sure that the agreement is reached. They will support it, and there will be no interference. At least to start with, all the media from both sides has to stop, and there is will be mentioning of Bahrain and involvement of Bahrain in any of that media. That will be a good start to show the support for the stability of Bahrain. The agreement has to be put into referendum. It has to be put into referendum so that the people have to vote on it, and an agreement has to be put on whatever agreement has reached between the parties. A time frame for the implementation to be agreed upon. There's no way just to have a document or agreement and there is no time frame. So time frame has to be there, whether it is 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, or 3 years, depending upon how they look at it. The implementation of reconciliation program involving the stakeholders and to remedy and the split in the society. We can take the Irish example. This is a good example of how Ireland, going through years of fighting between sectarian fighting, have finally sat together and reached to an agreement and reconciliation. 7, the implementation of high-level capacity building program for the government institution as well as for the opposition. This has to be part of this whole roadmap because you cannot just assume that things will go fine. There has to be a lot of capacity building for the government in terms of police force, judiciary system, etc., as well as for the opposition in dealing with parliament and how, dealing with the whole issues that relate to the agreement. Oops. I think 10 points, but they're just missed. Okay. Now, I'll go after that quickly. Is this instability local affair or will it have an effect regionally? I think if we look, I'm just going to provoke you by putting some things. I will not speak about them, but I think I leave it for you for a judgment, whether it is a local affair or will have an effect regionally. So I'm talking about the US elections, the nuclear Iran, the role of Saudi Arabia, revolution in Syria, the political situation in Iraq, Lebanon, and Israel. I think I leave it for you to connect the dots and find out how this is going to happen. Is Bahrain part of the solution or is it part of the problem in the region? So far, Bahrain is part of the problem, unfortunately. Bahrain could be part of the solution if these 10 points, or at least if stability comes to Bahrain, Bahrain could be part of the solution that comes into the area. So far, Bahrain is part of the problem, and Bahrain can affect other Arab Gulf states and the stability in Saudi Arabia as well. It could bring in the involvement of Iraq. If you look at Bahrain, is close to what's happening in Bahrain could affect the eastern province, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Kuwait, and even going to Iraq. Now, I'm just showing this here without any words, and just for you to look at, and you can understand what is this. This is basically, the green line is the Iranian, pro-Iranian movement, and how, quote unquote, people are projecting as Shia movement. And then the red one is the Muslim Brotherhood, or the other line of how all of this are moving. And if you look at all this, is going to Syria. So I think what's going to happen now, I cannot predict. I cannot say anything about it, and I don't think anybody can do that. And I think it's just left for the future to decide how this whole thing going. And I'm going to put one last slide, is what they call the greater New Middle East. Thank you very much.
But please keep your questions brief so we can field as many as possible. Sir, in the back, please.
Thank you. Dr. Einfels, Associate Professor at American Medicine.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, what's your question?
As far as I understand, political dialogue in Bahrain is a key for stability. The question I'm going to ask is how to reconcile opposition and the government because they have contradictory interests. That's the first question. The second question is, what Bahrain could bring to the region in terms of peace? As you know yourself, the situation now in this region is in trouble. What Bahrain could bring to the region in terms of peace?
Well, the first part, I think it's in any conflict. Usually, you'll have both sides that don't agree on all the points. And I remember, I think there was in Egypt, I think, during the struggle for Egypt independence from the British, I think Saad Zaghloul wants to go to Britain to negotiate with the British. And there was disagreement because they could not agree on the agenda. And, so the Americans came and talked to the British and say that, putting everything in the agenda doesn't mean that you agree on them. So put everything they want in the agenda and sit together. And eventually that's a point, that they put everything in the agenda and then they can sit together and talk. However, here in Bahrain, I think we are learning from the past. And that's why I brought, for example, the Irish example. We have to learn from what happens in other countries. And I think putting an open agenda will not help. That's why we have to have a focus on what are the requirements. So we have the Crown Prince has 7 points. We have the opposition, they have the Manama Charter, and then we have the program and they can put their views. From these, they can form a sort of an agreeable things to start with. With regard to the Bahrain, I think Bahrain, if it were acted like Switzerland, for example, non-alliance, Bahrain would work perfectly to solve a lot of problems in the region. We need a Switzerland in the Middle East. We need a Switzerland in which it's not related to this or that, in which we have all the UN bodies could be there to solve out these problems. Bahrain could play that role. I don't know whether Bahrain is ready or not.
Hello, sir. Thank you for coming. My name is Matthew Rose. I'm an analyst with the Department of Defense. As I understand it, you were the acting Minister of Health for less than a month after the raid of the SMC. Can you elaborate and speak to the importance, the issues, and the opportunities for the Bahraini medical system?
The importance of the medical system? Well, medical system is important like any other developing country. Bahrain medical system comprised mainly of Bahrainis. The majority of the doctors are Bahrainis. There are expats, but we have leading surgeons, etc., Bahraini surgeons. So their involvement is important in the country. Is this answer your question, or you want to ask about the involvement of them in the political side, or what?
As we see, it seems the medical system is a key issue. Specifically, you were appointed as a Shia Minister of Health, and then after some time, you decided to leave that post, in which then was, I believe, the Labor Minister had taken over. But as we see, the issues right now in the media seem to be for the opposition doctors currently going
Yes.
to the judicial.
Yeah, I think I was a minister for 17 days, and that's one. I came after they sacked the previous Minister of Health, and I came with the assurance that I will have full support to do some reforms and work with the oppositions and others to do to improve the healthcare and the situation, both politically and professionally. The doctors in Norway, and I put two statements. I came live on the Bahrain TV on the night of the invasion of the hospital, and pointedly, I was actually in the States, and I came back from the airport straight to the hospital, and there was like a curfew at that time. I mean, there was the national security, and it was dangerous to go. So anyhow, I have to be escorted until I reach the hospital. My point that I pointed out to the TV that there are no hostages in the hospital as of that night, the night of the attack. There are no weapons in the hospital as of that night. And I came on the TV and specifically asked the TV also to come and visit the hospital to make sure that there is none. I think in general, doctors are citizens of the country. They have their own personal views. They could be contradicted on that view, personal views, but professionally, they didn't do anything wrong. Answer the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bahrain. I have two questions. One is about the internal cohesion of the opposition. You split it up into three groups on your slides, and I think there's severe ideological and strategic and generational divides between them. If the formal opposition did come to agreement with the government in whether it's the Manama document or your 10 points or whatever, do you feel that the rest of the opposition would rally behind this and sort of things would
Good question.
take place? My second question is about the sixth point on your slide, which referred to the role of neighbors in not interfering in internal affairs. Can you discuss recent talk about political union between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain?
Okay. The first point is that will, if Al-Wafaq reach to an agreement, will the others go along? My answer is yes. Of course, they will oppose any. Nobody will agree because Haq, by the way, or Wafa, they have split from. They don't believe that there is genuine reform. But we cannot just live on don't believe. We have to really, on the ground, do things and move things. It's always nice to say this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But it's very difficult to sit down and try to reach a solution. A solution, there will never be 100% solution. And I think Al-Wafaq will definitely get it through for two reasons. One reason that they will get the support of the clerical people, the clergies, the ulama, okay? Second, which the majority will get the support. Secondly, as I put, this will be put in referendum. That means everybody has the right to say, yes, I agree or not agree. If there is a consensus about it, then that's it. It's just like the charter, you know. You don't have to score 98.4%, but in every democracy, if you score 60%, for example, that will be good enough. So I think, yes, and they will have then we have a sort of a ground for moving forward, because this is legitimate ground put through referendum. The second thing is the unity. Actually, I'm away from that, so I don't know what is. I'm reading it in the news as you're reading it, and I don't have a first source of sort of information to clarify what are the points, etc. What I read is through the Twitter or through newspapers or articles from both sides. And so far, I don't know how this one going. The same thing when somebody asked me about joining. The first time I came, I think in September, somebody asked me about, or was it November? Anyhow, during that time, asked me, what about this Morocco and Jordan joining the GCC? I said, I don't know, but there is really a difference between the two countries. The monarchy in Morocco is different than in Bahrain. The aspiration of the people there is different, etc. I don't see that this will work. But again, you know, time only will tell.
supportive of reconciliation as they've really suffered in the past year. But it's been my observation that they seem to be quite supportive of the hardliners in the government on a number of occasions, and that they've been taking this period to really scale back a lot of the initiatives of the Crown Prince. So could you speak to that, please? identify maybe different trends within the private sector?
Well, the private sector in Bahrain is very weak. I mean, I was a deputy chairman in the Chamber of Commerce, which is supposed to be the strongest body for the private sector. But the private sector is not, and also the private sector is not really a body by itself, because the private sector, again, you're talking about what's happened in the 14th February, that they look at the people. Are you Shia? Are you Sunni? If I am a Shia, then I am, I have to prove I am not a traitor. I have to prove that I am loyalist. I have to prove, so people will not boycott me, the others. It's just like this was fueled through a process. It reached a stage that even the businessman has suffered. And there are a lot of, usually businessmen, they don't look at Shias. They look at their business, because who's coming to my stores is coming, everybody's coming. So they don't really interested in politics. They're really interested in their business. And also, there is no way that you can divide the country, that this is a Shia business or a Sunni business. Business is business, and I have to get everybody in there. So the problem is there that it reached a stage in which people have to show that they are pro-government by escalating the positions and firing some of the people, the Shia employees. And now, of course, as things goes back now, for example, in the Chamber of Commerce, they have actually fired 2 board members. And that was not legal, because these people were elected by people, by the General Assembly, by all the businessmen. And just for the board just to take them out because they think that they participated or they visited the pier roundabout was not right. So they were reinstated. So I think it is still a balance. And unfortunately, some of the businessmen has been affected, like Jawad, for example. One of his place was actually raided like 56 times. So, people have suffered. Definitely, businessmen want to find a solution, but they don't have the shots. They're not calling the shots. They're away from that. Some of them, and the Sunni side, I said, when say others, like Sahwat al-Fatih, etc., comprising of some businessmen, which is basically Sunni businessmen. But also the Bahraini, the majority, small and medium, they are either belonging to this party or that party, etc. So the country is really fragmented in terms of finding the true business. There is not really a strong force like a Chamber of Commerce that can say, put everybody together and say, let's go to the government and ask for some reforms.
I have 2 questions. With regard to Al-Wafaq, do you think they could or would change their strategy? Because over the past year, they've had the peaceful demonstration and putting pressure, but could they in any way put more pressure on the government to get things moving? And the second question is with regard to the interaction between the hardliners and the reformers in the government headed by the Crown Prince. Do you see it anyway that at this point I think that the hardliners are having more weight and calling the shots and what's happening, especially with all the crackdown, the security enforcers and raids? But are the reformers going to have any chance to be in the picture or implement something to move along forward?
Thank you. So the first part was Al-Wafaq.
Yeah.
I think I was just reading a Twitter today of Jalil Khalil, who's the head of the Al-Wafaq party, and he's saying that the only way to go forward is to continue on a peaceful movement. So they're continuing their peaceful movement. And I think that's the only strategy, that successful strategy, is to keep on the peaceful movement and putting a pressure and utilizing the NGOs and others to put a pressure on the government. This is how the strategy they're using. Now, your second question is regarding the hardliners and the government. I think it's quite complicated, because there is a lot of analysis. Some people say this, some people that. And I try to put myself away from all of that, because some of it are propaganda, some of it true, some of it not true. at the end, I think if there is a just solution that satisfies the government, whether it's hardliners or not, something that will keep Bahrain unity together, and without actually changing the monarchy. We're still talking about a monarchy, a proper monarchy, supporting the monarchy. I think that will gain something. However, as I explained, that there are external parties that are involved, because the internal parties, they don't get their power, they have to get their power from outside. So if the external parties, the regional one, support that, I think we can reach an agreement. If they don't support it, if they're still fragmented about it, Bahrain could be a proxy like what's happening in Syria. So basically, the proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that could really affect Bahrain. But I think it is for the interest of the stability. The stability of Bahrain will make a stability also of Saudi Arabia, make stability of also the other countries. And people are unfortunately reflecting what's happening in Iraq into what's happening in Bahrain. And people in Iraq, the Sunnis saying that the Shias are controlling all the government and they're taking the, etc. We don't want that to happen to Bahrain. If something has to be in Bahrain, it has to be away from any religious influence. And I think that could be solved. Away from, it has to be secular in a sense that it should not be an Islamic government. It's not to satisfy the Muslim Brotherhood or Salafis, or not to satisfy the Al-Wafaq. I think here you put Al-Wafaq to test. And saying that, okay, we want a government. And even if they elect the government, the parties could be Sunnis, no problem. As long as it's done within the context of what has agreed upon.
Just to paraphrase you about Bahrain, Bahrain is the problem or the solution. So if the United States, the problem or the solution in Bahrain, and I mean like, you know, the country is harboring the Fifth Fleet there. And my second question is about the security sector reform. To what extent this government or the another government will be able or willing to include the security sector reform within the platform of reform, especially we saw like how those security forces were oppressive, repressive of the people. Part of them were naturalized, coming from other countries. So could you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I think I'll go with the second question first. I think the national security of every country is internal, not external. And I think if you look at the national security, you have to look at your internal security. What we have in Bahrain, we have a ticking bomb in which we have this sectarian issue is boiling, and it could spread, and it could to reach a stage that it's very difficult to put it together. The stability or the security of Bahrain is not by the armed forces. Security of Bahrain, first of all, security of the internal security. People have to contribute to that security. Every citizen is responsible, is the first and last defense of the security. If that could be applied, giving the people the chance to say, yes, I don't expect that from tomorrow that they will decide, they say, okay, let's go and bring all the Shias into the Bahrain Defense Force, or 50% of them, or into the police force. Fine, it doesn't have to be done like that. That's why we'd have to have a roadmap with a time frame. It's just like a balloon. You have all the parts in the balloon and slowly expanding it. But people have to believe that, yes, we are included into this process. We are not excluded of this process. This is the security of the country. With regard to Bahrain's part of the problem, or you're talking about U.S. part of the problem, I cannot answer if the U.S. is part of the problem or not. But I think U.S. can play a bigger role. They can play a bigger role in terms of putting things together. They have to somehow get away from this sort of balance thing. Yes. And there are still chances for their involvement also with their partners to get a solution. However, I mentioned last, I put several points, and I think you cannot just take by one point. So you have to look at all the thing. You have to look at from nuclear Iran, you have to look at Syria, you have to look at Lebanon, you have to look at Israel, you have to look at the US election, you have to look at all of these points. Then you have to decide.
Dr. Nazar, my name is Nora Cindy. I'm a graduate student at the Georgetown Public Policy Institute. I had the pleasure of working with you for the brief time that you were appointed as the Minister of Health while I was at the Economic Development Board. My question is twofold. Number one, to what extent do you agree? Well, obviously, you kind of hinted and mentioned that politics in the region is polarizing across the Sunni and Shia divide tremendously. We've seen it happen in Iraq and more recently in Syria. What are your thoughts on this? And the second part of the question is, I'm tremendously worried about the sectarian divide that is intensifying in Bahrain across Sunni and Shia divides. And I was wondering, do you see any real solutions that can be implemented in the short term to resolve this?
Well, with the second question, because I remember it quickly now, is that yes, there could be a solution. I gave example of the Irish experience in which they had, they were fighting each other. So far, we don't have that in Bahrain. Yes, we have in the Twitter, we have we have a lot of things said here and there, but so far there's no real clashes, unlike what's happened. And we don't want to be dragged to what's happened in Iraq. So Bahrain is still in a stage that could be controllable and we could work. And I think the real problem that people are saying that, okay, people think that they're alone, Who's going to support me? A Sunni person will say, okay, I have friends in the Shias and they're my good friends. But with this going on, I have to rely on my background and my family and the people whom I know that could support me. Because maybe these people will betray me and maybe they have their agenda. And in the media, it's always fueling the same thing, that those people are looking for Wilayat al-Faqih, those people are Safawis, those people are this and that, and all these bad things. And it's just like you saying that one side, these people are bad, they have to prove themselves they're good. So I tweet sometimes, and when I tweet sometimes, some people said, prove to us that you are good. You are a traitor, how to prove yourself you're good. So how to prove that you're good, People have to look at examples and to see. And I think now there is this shield which is fueled all the time. But this cannot continue for a long time. Either it has to reach a stage that a big confrontation, or it has to slow down, because you cannot just fuel it day and day and day. And this is what's happened in the Chamber of Commerce, for example. It was fueled and reached a stage that it's slowly going back. And I think people have to sit together and resolve that. Now, with the first question was about
the polarization across the Sunni Shia divide in the region.
Well, I think it's the same thing in the region. People are always looking at Iraq and what's happened in Iraq, and they say that they're reflecting it in Bahrain. Unfortunately, there are people who are fueling that they always reflect what's happening in Bahrain and Iraq, or linking Bahrain with Iran, or linking Bahrain with Hezbollah, or linking. There are sentiments of people. People have sentiments. If I have people's sentiments that I could be pro-Israel, I could be pro-Hezbollah, I could be pro-Iran. People have certain sentiment, but sentiment does not mean people have agenda, okay? And this sentiment, sometimes it is short term. When there was a war between Hezbollah and Israel, and what happened, a lot of people sympathize with Hezbollah. In the Arab world, Sunnis, even in the hardliners, because it's just sentiment. After that, this whole thing finished.
My name is Jason Stern. I'm a graduate student at George Washington University. Thank you, Dr. Albaharna. It seems most people when talk about the government talk about the crown prince versus the prime minister. Why does the king seem to be so aloof in the situation? What could he do to improve the situation?
Well, I think, as I explained regarding the government, nobody knows exactly how things are working. I mean, this is all, it's just like somebody says something and everybody is just passing it. We have to look at things with facts, and we have to say, okay, there are problems there, and we have to rectify the problems. And I think rather than going into the solution, I think if a solution comes, of course, the person that will come with the solution is the king. I mean, he is the king of Bahrain. So he's a leader, so we're expecting that anything, any reform, that etc., from the government side will come from that side. Now, he could assign the crown prince or assign anybody, but it is his decision.
If I may ask a question,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
you left it to us to connect the
Yes,
dots.
yes.
And if I'm connecting the dots correctly, then it seems to me that the solution is categorically out of Bahraini hands, including the king. He may be part of the solution, but this initiative can't possibly be coming from anything aside from the dots that you're asking us to connect. So the change has to take place outside of Bahrain first.
Well, I think no. I think yes, there is an influence from outside, but unless the people in Bahrain doesn't come up with a solution, and then try to get the support of others, there will be no solution. If we expect that a solution comes from Iran and Saudi Arabia or some others, the solution might not be satisfactory to the people. I think it's for the people to sit together first and agree on that, and then try to sell that to it. Maybe it will be tweaking it, etc. And there will always be a dialogue back and forth. And I think it's, in all my life I was an optimist, you know. In a stage I was very much pessimist. But I think we have to be optimists because that's the only way to go forward. And they say that little optimism is good. Of course, a lot of optimism is very bad. So we should have this little optimism that keeps us going. Otherwise, we'll just hope that nothing will happen.
A little optimism. These are going to be the final words, I think. Thank you very much.